Dog Nation's postseason coverage, Go for 2 in 22, is made possible by our partners, including Kroger. Visit Kroger for all your holiday needs and to stock up for bowl season. R.S. Andrews, Dog Nation's choice for all your heating and air needs. Visit rsandrews.com to see how they can make you smile today. Marlowe's Tavern. Need a tasty gift this holiday season? Try a Marlowe's Tavern gift card. Visit marlowestavern.com. Georgia Farm Bureau. With local agents all across the state of Georgia, Georgia Farm Bureau is the home team. Find your agent today at gfbinsurance.com. Discover Dunwoody. Stay at one of our 9 hotels and enjoy easy access to 2 MARTA stations, which is just a short ride to downtown. Visit discoverdunwoody.com/dognation to book your stay today. Royal Caribbean. Reserve your cabin on the 2nd annual cruise with Dog Nation in April. Visit royaldogs.com to reserve your cabin today. The Wilson PC Personal Injury Attorneys. Because Atlanta happens from out of nowhere. When the unexpected happens to you, visit atlantahappens.com. The 7-6 Apparel Company. The perfect holiday gifts for the hard-to-find person in your family. Visit the76.com to start shopping today. And Berkshire Hathaway Home Services of Georgia. The best time for new beginnings is now. Forever moving you. Visit bhhsgeorgia.com to start your search today. And here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Let's go for Hello, everybody. Welcome to this Go for 2 in 22 special as the college football playoff top 25 released moments ago. Georgia staying on top of the CFP rankings. I'm joined by Connor Riley, and they certainly tried to manufacture some drama with this announcement. You know, in previous weeks, they've kind of announced Georgia early and then kind of worked their way down to 4, 5, and 6. Some of those teams below in the rankings today. They saved Georgia, Michigan for last. They sold the idea that maybe they would consider putting Michigan at number 1. But Connor, I don't know if you're like me. I think that their hand was actually tipped about what they were going to do and what they really had to do in terms of keeping Georgia number 1. When you saw Mississippi State make the top 25 after winning the Egg Bowl, that's a team that Georgia beat, pretty handily on the road. When you saw South Carolina enter this poll this week at number 19, that's a team that Georgia also beat 48-7. Michigan's got 2 wins against top 10 opponents, but Georgia's got 4 very convincing wins against teams ranked in this top 25 right now. And so when you saw the Bulldogs in there, when you saw the Gamecocks in there kind of mirroring what the AP poll had done earlier this week, at that point in time, no matter what kind of drama they tried to manufacture, it was fairly obvious that Georgia was going to stay number 1. You see the top 10 on your screen, but this was, I think, kind of tipped off by the bottom part of this top 25.
Yeah, Georgia now has 4 ranked wins. I would also note that Georgia's 3rd best win, South Carolina, is better than Alabama's best win for making comparisons there. And we've talked about, we brought her name up before, and she's given you great offseason content to be sure. Georgia fans, I am begging you, please stop engaging with Heather Dinich content. I think she was sort of the leader of the train of, hey, let's rank Michigan number 1 this week and laid out X, Y, Z, why that is the case. She's very clearly, in my opinion, knowing that she gets better engagement by bashing Georgia because it is so much of a shtick for her. And I think that sort of led to this week. I saw a lot of angry tweets this afternoon saying, how could you rank Michigan ahead of Georgia? When, as you point out the case, Georgia's got 4 ranked wins. Michigan has 2. That has a chance to be 5 after this past weekend. And I think Dinich has a history now of questioning Georgia and seeing her engagement benefit from that. And that led to more interest, I think, in tonight's college football playoff rankings, at least at the top, than I think maybe many of us had anticipated coming out of Saturday and into Sunday. I thought going into tonight, how would they rank Ohio State, Alabama, Tennessee? How would those teams sort of rank out there would be the most interesting thing, and apparently it was not. And so if you're in the offseason, if you see some tweets, if it's your Sunday morning and you're seeing questions about where Georgia might be, if Heather Dinich is one of those people pushing them, maybe just don't listen to him, because I sense from her it's just hot air at this point.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of Dinich. I think she's essentially a press secretary for the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, posing as an objective reporter. I've not been a fan of hers for quite some time. And you are right, Connor. We were kind of sold, I think, over the weekend that, hey, the drama is going to be between Alabama, Ohio State, maybe Tennessee to a certain extent. Poor Tennessee when the show began, they only had those 6 of those bracket spots, like kind of showcased of, ooh, who's going to make the top 6. If you're a Vols fan, that's all you need to know right there, that your faint playoff hopes have essentially completely disappeared. They weren't even using your story as fodder for hype before the show began. That gives you an idea of how little you have going on for you right now. But the Ohio State-Alabama decision so decisive, because ultimately I'm a big believer that the one thing this committee does consistently year over year is they count losses. They just don't like teams with multiple losses, and Ohio State has the nod on Alabama for that reason and that reason alone. And so therefore you go to the Georgia-Michigan part of this. But Connor, be the heel here for a moment. Play devil's advocate. Mm-hmm. I honestly don't think there was any argument for ranking Michigan ahead of Georgia. And people say, well, of course, BA, that's exactly what you would say, which is why I'm going to ask you to now play the other side of it. Mm-hmm. What is the most sound, reasonable argument for why somebody would have preferred Michigan over Georgia here?
I think for this week, given the thoroughness that they beat Ohio State on the road, it is technically the best win in college football at this standpoint using the college football playoff rankings. I think there's an argument there. They also have a top 10 win over a Penn State team who has beaten every team on its schedule except for the ones ranked ahead of them in Ohio State and Michigan in there. So, the case is there for Michigan. But again, they didn't play anyone in the non-conference schedule. And I think the thing that ultimately works against them the most is that this weekend they're going to play an 8-4 Purdue team that did not find itself ranked in the college football playoff top 25.
And I noticed that too.
And you could have been very easy to bump them up. This Purdue team has been playing well as of late. But the fact that Purdue team didn't even get into the top 25 rankings this week, when you've got an 8-4 Mississippi State, an 8-4 Texas team ranked in those sort of, an 8-4 Notre Dame team as well. When you've got Purdue ranked behind them, I think that sort of speaks to what the committee overall feels about the strength of the Big Ten, aside from those 3 teams at the top. So I could see for 1 week them have moving Michigan up just based on the strength of, hey, best win, went on the road, did it in an impressive fashion at Ohio State. But at the end of the day, I think this committee is also well aware of the fact, well, if we move Michigan that high up, don't we have to move Ohio State a little bit further down? And if USC loses this weekend, I think Ohio State now very clearly stands to be the team that benefits the most and would step in for them in that number 4 spot. And I don't know how you can punish Ohio State to the level of that magnitude while also rewarding Michigan at the same point.
I'm completely flabbergasted here. We have 9 terrific sponsors for our Go for 2 and 22 coverage. And apparently they have really ponied up here because we now have a scroll at the bottom of the screen, ticker, if you will, showing you the entirety of the top 25. This is such new ground being broken here as a part of Go for 2 and 22 tonight. I can't even tell you how exciting this time is. So if you missed the announcement a moment ago, you can literally watch those. It's almost like when you're a kid, you're waiting to see if your school
scores on SportsCenter.
You can now actually see and watch the entire top 25 kind of rolling right past you right now. Our buddy Ryan Walker also letting us know that Corrigan is breaking down at the moment why Georgia is still number 1. So always fun to have Corrigan here on that. And Connor, let me go to something that Kirby Smart talked about on Monday, which, I have made a really big deal about being number 1. I'm a Georgia partisan. I wanted Georgia to be number 1 tonight because I do want Georgia to play the Peach Bowl in Atlanta. I think it's a huge deal. I used to be a big college basketball fan. In college basketball, we have talked about where teams have been playing the NCAA tournament for years. Duke always wanting to be in the East region. There's always that idea of where your path is the easiest depending on where you're set up. We haven't done this a lot in college football. I do believe Georgia playing the semifinal game in Atlanta would be a huge benefit. It's funny, they never talk about this on TV, which I think is kind of funny, but I think it is a really big deal for Georgia. However, this week, Kirby Smart said, not really. And he mentioned the fact that Rose Bowl in 2017, that was a 7-day turnover before the national championship. I talked to Jake Fromm about that on Dog Nation Daily today, and he talked about how narrow that window was between the 2 games and what a big deal that was to Kirby. So I guess let's take Kirby at face value here. Do you think, Connor, there's a chance I'm overstating the value of getting a chance to play the national semifinal game in Atlanta, given the fact that Kirby said, hey, your actual travel windows are a little longer at this time?
I do think that because it's working in the reverse this time, where Georgia would have to go from Atlanta to Los Angeles, that sort of works against you in that circumstance. But the alternative is going to Phoenix, and I have been told that if they do have to go to Phoenix, that they would very likely stay in Phoenix in the run-up to the national championship game, which is something that Clemson did in 2018, and I believe it worked to their benefit there in that scenario. So I see both sides of it. I just think if Georgia's playing USC, who is the current number 4, if they're playing Ohio State in Atlanta, that is going to be overwhelmingly Georgia fans. And I do think that there's a value there. And we got to talk to Javon Bullard tonight. We got to talk to Zion Logue tonight. Zion Logue said, yeah, when we play in Atlanta, we treat it as a home game. And they'll have played it by that point, potentially be their third game there in Atlanta. I did look up the Falcons' schedule this week to see if there was a chance that Georgia would have more home wins than the Falcons this season. However, Atlanta has done a pretty good job of winning at home this year. So there's a real comfort level that Georgia has in playing in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. But I think when you factor in that just the extra logistics of it, and I was not there at the Rose Bowl in 2017. I'm still a little bitter about that. But I've been told by people that were there that when we were talking to players in the locker room afterwards, Kirby Smart came in there like a bat out of hell and was telling guys, hey, we got to go. We got to get out of here quick and get ready to go now. A little longer layoff this time, 9 days between the national title game and the college football playoff semifinal. But I expect Kirby Smart, wherever that game is being played, the second it ends, because he's been very consistent with this. It's why he likes Georgia Tech being a noon game in years past. The more time that you have, that you can start getting rest, that you can start prepping for the next opponent, that you can start getting back home, I think all adds up over the course of the season.
I think you're exactly right about that. And just for a little additional context, when Georgia played the national championship game here in what would have been January of 2018, they actually practiced on that Saturday in Athens. They went back to Athens to practice. So they literally treated it like a home game. I don't think you can do that for a bowl game. I don't think you can. But, Georgia has a history of actually, in a big game before, take the bus. Everybody goes back down 316 or across 316 and goes back to Athens to practice. That's the context there for that. So, Connor, let's talk about what's going on underneath Georgia right now. I believe for all intents and purposes, Georgia's in the playoff now no matter what. We just had the debate about, what happens from a seeding standpoint. Look at Michigan here at number 2. Good job by our producer, Michael Carvel, with this full-screen graphic here. I believe that Michigan is now in the playoff no matter what. Do you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
I believe that, and I'm actually very surprised to hear myself saying this because this is not the kind of behavior I'm accustomed to from the CFP. I believe that TCU is in the playoff no matter what, unless they lose by like 40 points on Saturday.
I hope I'm wrong. TCU, I'm begging you here. Don't mess around and find out with a loss on Saturday if the playoff committee is really going to let you in, because, and maybe it's just I've heard you speak about it so often. Look, if you're a playoff committee and you're telling me a one-loss non-champion TCU or Alabama are the two teams potentially to be the number 4 seed and go play Georgia, look, this is all for television. It's all for an entertainment product. Don't you put Alabama there as the number 4 seed. Again, I hope I'm wrong. TCU has been a better team than Alabama this season. Don't tell me about who would play and who would beat who on a neutral field, because both these teams have played 12 games to this point. TCU has found a way to win all of them. Alabama has found a way to lose 2 of them. And I do think that I agree with you that in a just world, TCU would be in no matter what. To go 12-0 against that Big 12 schedule is incredibly impressive in my eyes. But if, because it's TCU and they don't have the brand level respect that say, if this is a Texas or an Oklahoma that went 12-0 against the Big 12 schedule, they're in and we're not having this discussion. But because it is still TCU, and because I think Alabama stands to benefit as a team most from TCU losing, I do think that is something I still think about. And I hope that TCU takes care of business on Saturday and doesn't have to sweat out on Sunday.
We can't do a show like this without me putting on my conspiratorial hat at some point in time. Mm-hmm. This is kind of my conspiratorial, viewpoint about this. And maybe you disagree with me here, but I sort of sense the political winds have been blowing in a slightly different direction around the playoff the last year or so. One of the number one reasons that the argument was made to expand the playoff, and ultimately it's about money, but like the public-facing argument related to this is, hey, we need to make more teams feel like they have a chance to win. Something right now that literally like 99% of the sport sort of feels like they have no chance of winning the national championship. And they're probably right for feeling that way. That I get the sense that if you're a mid-level ACC program, if you're a mid-level Pac-12 program, I get the sense you're asking the question of if TCU, which right now is like number 1 in strength of record according to ESPN FPI, their resume for the playoffs is actually pretty good. That if they can't make the playoff going 12-1, if they get punished for a 13th game, which ironically back in 2014, one of the reasons they didn't make the playoffs because they didn't have a 13th game, that I think it would be left to ask the question of, well, they can't get in like this, that who among us can ever get in? I sort of get the sense that there's a little bit of a political wind blowing to make more teams feel like they have a chance. And the truth is, Bama's been in the playoff a million years, and some of those games were particularly well rated from a TV standpoint anyway. So they maybe feel like they have the opportunity now to just try something different, because the stuff they had tried has not exactly been, gangbusters at the box office necessarily.
Right. And I think you see last year them putting Cincinnati in and them rewarding there in that faith. And then, eventually when this does move to 12 teams, which it is going to, and we'll find out more tomorrow when that is going to be, either 24, 25, or 26 possibly. When I take a step back and look at this, there's a very real chance we wake up on Friday morning, or on Saturday morning rather, and we know who the 4 college football playoff teams are going to be. Yeah. Now, I don't think that USC is going to beat Utah. I'm going to tip my hand a little bit here for go with the flow. I think Utah is going to find a way to win that game and mess things up for the Pac-12. But if this is a 12-team playoff, look at those teams, 9, Clemson, 10, Kansas State, 12 or 11 rather, Utah. LSU is a 14 seed. You have teams that are playing this weekend that I think are playing for their playoff potential. And while sure, it doesn't impact Georgia, it doesn't impact Alabama, it doesn't impact Ohio State, I do think that we are looking at this from a more interested, national angle. If we've got teams from all over the country possibly playing for their college football playoff spot, where anyone east of the Pacific time zone knows that that there's a very real chance, as you laid out earlier, that the college football playoff, the top 3 teams are already in, regardless of what happens this weekend.
And you touched on something that a lot of our audience might not be aware of, is that the Pac-12 title game traditionally is on Friday night. So this is one of those deals that a lot of our folks have never watched the Pac-12 title game before. This may actually be one of those years in which I think it's definitely worth your time to do so, because there's a lot at stake when USC plays Utah, a team that has already beaten them once this year. Connor, Dan Wetzel, who's a reporter and columnist for Yahoo, had an interesting argument the other day. I don't agree with this, but this is a very interesting argument. He said that if you go into championship weekend with 4 teams essentially in, if they can't play their way in because of the championship, then they shouldn't be able to play their way out of the championship either, which is obviously kind of related to USC here. And I don't agree with that. I think that TCU has done enough to make the playoff, even if it loses. I think that Michigan and Georgia obviously have done enough to make the playoff, even if they lose. My belief on USC is they don't have enough wins yet to be obviously one of the 4 best teams. If they add a Utah win to go along with what in consecutive weeks will be, Notre Dame and UCLA, at that point in time, they've built for themselves a playoff resume. I don't quite think they're there yet, though. I do think it's fair to say to USC, hey, we need to see you win on Friday to be in the playoff, because up until this point, they really had not done very much until the last 2 weeks.
Right. And I think when looking at their schedule, they benefited. And I know they beat Oregon State on the road earlier this season before Oregon State went on a run this year, but they benefited by not playing Oregon and Washington and not, I think, having to play the same rigorous schedule that, say, an Oregon did by having to play a Utah and a UCLA for the Pac-12 out there. And so while I understand most years, I think the sentiment that he is projecting there, Dan Wetzel, along with the fact that why should Ohio State and Alabama benefit from the fact that they don't have to play a game this weekend because they didn't take care of business in the regular season the same way that a USC did? I think there are enough holes and questions about this USC team. Caleb Williams is fantastic, but that defense is incredibly reliant on turnovers, and that defense is also very, very bad in terms of, yards per play and things like that, where if they're not turning the ball over, they're probably giving up a touchdown. And so I think with USC, you have to answer one more question for me. You've beaten Notre Dame. Yes, you beat them at home. You beat UCLA by 3, and again, that could have gone either way there. There are still enough questions to me about USC where if this is truly a top 4 team, they should be able to beat Utah. This is a Utah team that I think is very good, but they've lost a lot of close games this year. Lost on the road at Florida, lost at home lost on the road, against Oregon, lost to UCLA. This is not a perfect team. And while it is certainly capable, in my opinion, of beating USC this weekend, if USC is legitimately a playoff team, they should win this game.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right about that. And look, if you're a Georgia fan, I think you're rooting for USC here. And that's not to say that I think that Georgia wouldn't beat Ohio State. I believe they probably would. But I do believe that Ohio State's a tougher game than USC is. When I think about the kinds of teams that are most likely to challenge Georgia, I think it's the teams that come closest to play that complementary brand of football. And Ohio State's not a great defense, but they're better defensive than they were a year ago, and they're way better defensively than USC is, to go along with like Marvin Harrison at wide receiver and obviously CJ Stroud at quarterback. He hasn't had a perfect year, but he's still a very good player in his own right. So I certainly believe that Georgia could beat Ohio State, but I think that USC is a way easier matchup. I think that USC is the most favorable matchup for Georgia of all the potential playoff contenders. So ultimately, Georgia could probably beat anybody, but if you want the absolute most advantageous path, I think you're cheering for the men of Troy on Friday.
Yeah, and I would agree with that there. I just think Ohio State is a more talented team, certainly along the lines of scrimmage there. I think that's where a real benefit, whereas USC, as great as Caleb Williams is, and believe me, I think he's going to end up winning the Heisman this year. They have some very good receivers out there, Jordan Addison, Mario Williams. As great as that team is, they really do not have the guys, I think, on the line of scrimmage to hang with Georgia. And in a way that even that Oklahoma team, you go back and look at those early Oklahoma teams that Lincoln Riley had inherited from Bob Stoops. They put a lot of NFL offensive linemen into the draft. And so I do think that is not the case with this USC team right now. And I think that would be an area, I think maybe similar to what we saw Georgia do to Michigan last year, where Georgia is just so much better on the lines of scrimmage that they would make things almost non-competitive against USC. Now, Caleb Williams is much better than what Michigan had on offense a season ago, but if that Georgia team is careful with the ball, and granted they have been a little turnover happy at times this year, if that Georgia team's careful with the ball, I don't see how they don't put up 50 points on USC.
No, I think that's a fair point. If Georgia beats LSU on Saturday, that'll be a 5th-ranked win for them on this CFP Top 25. Obviously, there's a lot of football left to play. Does this have the makings of being a historic Georgia team? I don't know that people thought the 2021 – it was a historic defense thing in a lot of folks' mind. I don't know that 2021 Georgia gets mentioned in the historic team category. If you've got 5 ranked wins going into the playoff, and if all of them are comfortable wins, are we talking about the makings of a historic team?
I think we are. And while, yes, it's not the most talented team that Georgia has had or fielded, and it's not going to be the most talented team that Georgia and Kirby Smart will have ever fielded. But having said all that, this team finds a way to win, and more often than not, done so comfortably. They've only had one score game this season. And you look at this talent, look, they're still going to have a lot of guys that are going off into the NFL. But you look out there right now, Nolan Smith lost for the year at that edge rusher position. It is a defense that only has 1 finalist for any award in terms of the defensive awards that are given out this year. And having said all that, still number 1 in scoring defense, still number 1 in rushing defense. And that's after losing 5 first-round picks a year ago. There is something about this team's DNA that they have both gotten better over the course of the season. I think that is undeniably true on the defensive side of the ball. You can ask some questions about the offense. I think that's certainly fair there. And so you've seen this team get better over the course of the year. And if they go out and they play well against LSU, and then they go and win a college football playoff game, and then they go win a national title, go look up the list of teams that went back-to-back national titles. It's incredibly small. And so if Georgia is able to do that, I think you really have to reconsider where we evaluate this team in terms of greatness. And while, yes, they're probably not going to play Alabama this year. They're probably not going to play on Ohio State. I think the 2 teams that match up with them most in terms of raw talent. It says something that Georgia is going to be able potentially to go through the schedule, win every game, some of them even more comfortably than others, especially in their biggest games, against Tennessee, against Oregon, against South Carolina now as well. And for them to go out and do what they did this season, if they're impressive in the college football playoff, I do think you have to reconsider where this team ranks historically.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I want you to talk to me like I'm 5 years old for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Why is Alabama ranked ahead of Tennessee?
It's hard to come out and actually say this, but so I do get that. I believe it was maybe Peter Burns or it was Brett McMurphy. One of them tweeted out Tennessee is better head-to-head, better strength of schedule, better resume, better wins, better everything. The problem is that Hendon Hooker was responsible for almost all of those, and he is not going to be coming back and playing this season. And so because of that does force the committee, in my opinion, to evaluate Tennessee differently, unfairly, might I add, and it speaks to the quarterback position and the way that position impacts the sport. If Jalen Hyatt is out for the rest of the season, if he is the one who tears his ACL, and I hope that does not happen, but if he is the one that has that injury, Tennessee's probably ahead of Alabama right now. The reality is that the quarterback position has such a stranglehold on the way this sport is viewed. And the fact that Hendon Hooker is not out there playing, I think impacts the way that this committee would view Tennessee competing going forward. Even though Joe Milton proved plenty capable against Vanderbilt this past weekend. And if we remember all the way back at the start of the 2021 season, actually beat out Hendon Hooker for the starting job at Tennessee. And so while I think Hendon Hooker is, Joe Milton rather, is maybe a potentially capable quarterback, in a 14 playoff, we're never going to be given the ability to see it. Whereas I think this is another example where a 12-team playoff, look, Tennessee clearly, I think, one of the best 12 teams in the country, and I would like to see Joe Milton, what he could potentially do here. You think back to Ohio State in 2014, Cardale Jones steps in for an injured JT Barrett in the final week of the regular season after he breaks his ankle against Michigan, and he goes on and he leads Ohio State to a national title that year. And so I think eventually we will see, a team like a Tennessee where, you lose a star player late in the year, they ultimately are able to win their way into the playoff and prove that, hey, even though we lose this great player, we are still clearly one of the best teams in the country. Unfortunately, a 14 playoff doesn't allow them the opportunity to do so.
And Jay Shipes and others in the comment section talking about the fact they gave up 63 points to South Carolina. Hey, maybe that is the answer. I'm not saying there's not an answer. I'm just saying I want to hear in one sentence what it is. Connor says, Hendon Hooker's hurt. Maybe that's the answer. I made the college basketball comparison a little earlier. We have seen teams certainly punished from a seeding standpoint in college basketball because the star player got hurt. Maybe Tennessee is solely suffering because of the fact that their quarterback's, hurt here right now, and they're not the same team because of that. I don't think it matters because I don't believe either team's really making the playoffs here with 2 losses right now. But it is one of those interesting things where it's sometimes hard for this body to decide where head-to-head matters and where it doesn't. I mean, if the two teams played in a neutral field tomorrow, Alabama would be a point spread favorite. The same way if Michigan and Ohio State played again tomorrow in a neutral field, Ohio State would still be a point spread favorite. But as much as I like point spreads and gambling and things like that, I still want the on-field results to matter more here than the theoretical point spreads do.
Yeah, and that's one of the frustrating things that this committee has shown us repeatedly is that on-field results don't always necessarily matter in the way that which we think they should. Tennessee deserves credit for going out and winning that game because, as we all remember, look, Alabama had the ball with less than a minute to go on the Tennessee side of the field, and they could not execute and convert a field goal and find a way to win that game. They lost it, and Tennessee, to their credit, found a way to win it. And if this is a 12-team playoff, I do believe that Tennessee should be ranked over Alabama. What Tennessee has done over the course of the season has been more impressive to me than what Alabama has done. Even giving up, 63 points against South Carolina and getting, I think, humiliated on the road against Georgia. Tennessee has not played a ton of close games in comparison to the way that Alabama has this season. Yes, Florida was a close game, but that game was not as close as the final score indicated. I think people watching there, the Pitt game, yes, that is unarguably a close game, but you can say, oh, yes, Alabama lost on the last play of the game against LSU and against Tennessee. That's a fair point. But they also played a one-score game against Texas. They played a one-score game against Ole Miss. They played a one-score game against Texas A&M. And if you know football, if you're playing a lot of one-score games, traditionally speaking, you win about 50% of those. Well, in those 5 games, Alabama went 3-2. And the bigger issue with Alabama this year is why are you playing so many of those one-score games when you have such a wide talent advantage over everyone else that you've played? Ohio State has not played any one-score games this season. The closest game they played, obviously, they lost to Michigan this weekend by double digits, but then they beat Penn State by 13. Georgia has played one-score game this season. They were able to win it. I think when you're an Alabama team and you open yourself up to criticism is because you have played so many one-score games and made it close when you are not dominating opposing teams like the way Georgia has, like the way an Ohio State has this season.
All right, 2 final points from me, and then I'll let you say whatever you want to kind of take us out of here. I think when you look around, you say, well, where's Alabama? Where's Ohio State? Where are these teams that we expected to be near the top that aren't kind of there right now? By the way, here's Boo Corrigan on Ohio State over Alabama. He says Ohio State, the wins over Notre Dame and Penn State. You look at Alabama, their big wins were over Texas and Mississippi State. So that's Boo Corrigan making that statement there. And I think when it was all said and done, we're not that surprised to see Ohio State over Alabama in that spot. They just have, he's not going to say this, but they just have one fewer loss. And that for the committee has historically been a very, very big deal. So that's the argument to make there. To go back to the point I was making a moment ago, I think when you look around here, it's kind of like the opposite of that great line of the movie Rounders. If you can't spot the sucker at the table, that means you are the sucker. Like if you can't spot the behemoth you have to play before the playoff comes to an end, that means you are the behemoth. And right now, that's what Georgia is.
A man after my own heart, quoting Rounders here. I do start to wonder maybe a little bit about Michigan with the way they beat Ohio State this weekend. Look, if they play Michigan again, which I expect will likely be the national title game, if this is the 4 college football playoff teams we see this Sunday, it's going to be a little bit of a different game. Georgia is not as good in the defensive line as they were a season ago, and I do think this Michigan offensive line is better. Now, as a whole, this Michigan team is probably a little bit worse, but there's a toughness to this Michigan team that I think they've earned and gone out and shown this year that wasn't exactly there a season ago. Yes, they roughed up Ohio State, but that was a season ago. That was their Super Bowl. That was their crowning moment. Getting to the playoff was the goal for them. I think this Michigan team this year, given what happened to them against Georgia last year, and given what we saw them do, especially in the second half there against Ohio State this past weekend, they know that they can play and contend for a national championship, having beaten Ohio State 2 years ago and proving that it is no fluke. And I know, Georgia is, I think, a better team than Ohio State this year. I think we've seen that over the course of the year. And just frankly, this Ohio State team is not that tough, as I told you a week ago. I do think that there's a belief maybe this year that despite what happened last year on the field, that this Michigan team is a tougher team than a season ago. This Georgia team is not quite the same animal. And I do think that Michigan maybe could find a way to give them a game. But to your larger point there, Georgia is the best team in college football this season. They have the best A game in college football this season. And they have shown repeatedly in games against Oregon, Tennessee, and South Carolina, ironically, the three highest ranked teams they faced so far this year. Now they will play LSU on Saturday, so we'll see how that goes. They've played their best when playing their best. And so if they can continue to deliver A performances in big games, they're absolutely going to show why they're the best team in college football this year.
And then my last thing here, Georgia's obviously playing a ranked LSU on Saturday. The team that Michigan playing, Purdue, is unranked by this committee here tonight. Does that mean that a win is enough for Georgia to keep number one? Will there be a cosmetic evaluation of these two teams based on, Michigan, if they beat Purdue more soundly than Georgia beats LSU? Does that bring Michigan back into play for the number one ranking here, or is a win now enough for Georgia?
I believe a win is enough. I know in talking with you on your show this morning, you probably like to see Georgia come out and play a focus game and play their best. But I think given, again, if they win, they'll have 5 wins over ranked opponents. Michigan will have 2. And as we sit here right now, all those wins are by double digits from Georgia. And it's not just all in Sanford Stadium. They beat an Oregon team on a neutral field, and I get that was in Atlanta. They beat South Carolina at South Carolina. They beat Mississippi State at Mississippi State, all in impressive fashion. So I just think the totality of this Georgia resume, along with when they play their A game, it is the best game in the country. And while Michigan certainly looked great on Saturday and an impressive win over Ohio State and what will ultimately, I think, be the best quote-unquote win in college football this season, the totality of what Georgia has done is going to be enough to carry them through. So I think, yes, so long as they do win on Saturday, they will be the number 1 seed on Sunday, and they will be playing in Atlanta for the college football playoff semifinal.
Anything else? Tulane, highest rated group of 5. They've obviously got a conference title game coming up here, but it looks like they're on their way to a New Year's Six bowl, and maybe it's the opportunity to play in a New Year's Six that ultimately prevented Willie Fritz from taking the Georgia Tech job. I honestly don't know. I really don't even care that much. Mm-hmm. But that may be a little bit of the story here. I think quietly one of the best teams in the country that nobody talks about. I tried to hype them at the beginning of the year, and they totally laid an egg when they went on the road to Michigan. I think Penn State at 8 right now is a pretty good football team. Is there anything else that's interesting to you? I think it's interesting that Florida State's at 13 now. They did not play a very good game Friday night against Florida. Is there anything that's interesting to you at all here that we haven't touched on?
So there's a conspiracy. I'm going to put on my conspiracy theory hat here.
Love it.
I wonder if a week from now they do maybe change up the rotation a little bit in that 5, 6, and 7 range, and they put Tennessee ahead of Alabama, because what that allows for is the Sugar Bowl is designated to take the highest ranked SEC team or the SEC champion, but that will be Georgia, and they'll be in the college football playoff. So then it automatically defaults to the highest ranked team. And if you're the Sugar Bowl, and if you're Tennessee in this circumstance, I think you'd much rather go play in a Sugar Bowl and enjoy that win. Mm-hmm. And what that does is if Tennessee is able to be ranked ahead of Alabama, it sets up an Orange Bowl matchup against a likely ACC champion in Clemson against Alabama, a game I think both sides would be very interested in playing given the recent history between those. And I do think that would be a very good television product to watch. Now, I do think Clemson and Tennessee would play, but I don't think that many people want to see that much orange on the field. I think it'd be quite a disgusting display that day. So I'll be interested if on Sunday they do bump up Tennessee over Alabama, given at that point they have said in the past, that is when they take in the totality of the resumes and what they have seen. And if that puts Tennessee and New Orleans for the Sugar Bowl and that gives us a Clemson-Alabama game, I think a lot of people would be excited by both those possibilities.
Yeah, and I think the Tennessee fans, would actually flock to New Orleans, and that bowl's not always the easiest sell. But for Vols fans, they might be willing to go there. It would be weird, though, to change your mind without an additional data point, when it's all said and done like that. I mean, the reasoning you just put out there makes all the sense in the world, but how do you sell that on TV and justify that decision? That's the part I guess I'd be curious about.
Right. The thing is, you'd have to do it this week. And unfortunately, they did not choose to make that decision. And ultimately, I think that's going to be worse off. And now, granted, Alabama, we'll see how interested they are in going to play probably a Kansas State team in the Sugar Bowl. And then Tennessee Clemson, I think, could be a fun game there, especially with the recent comments made by Dabo Swinney last week talking about Tennessee. So I do think that'll be interesting there.
I'll also say this: South Carolina at 19 in the final ranking of the regular season. That is a heck of a good job by Shane Beamer. And obviously he had to earn 2 big old pelts on the wall to get that done here with Tennessee and Clemson in back-to-back weeks. That is a tremendous, tremendous accomplishment. I don't think you can short sell that whatsoever.
And I'll say this, I think Nebraska did Shane Beamer a favor in hiring their offensive coordinator, Marcus Satterfield, because you and I have talked about this. I mean, this was a South Carolina team in 2 out of 3 weeks. They scored 10 points against Missouri, and they scored 6 against Florida, where those 6 came on a fake punt touchdown. And for them to go out, hang 63 on Tennessee at home, and then go out and beat Clemson 31-30, using special teams as a weapon in those games, I think speaks to what Shane Beamer has done. But there are still a lot of questions about what the direction of this offense holds. And I think if Shane Beamer is able to go out and hire a dynamic offensive coordinator that is actually able to consistently produce on that side of the ball, because I don't believe Marcus Satterfield was doing that, I think that does open up, South Carolina the opportunity to, hey, maybe we can't get to where Georgia is just because we're never going to be able to recruit to that level, but why can't we have a season like Tennessee just had, where we're able to get consistent special teams, good defense, and a passable offense there? So South Carolina, I think, has a real opportunity here, coming off a really strong season under Shane Beamer, to make a dynamic offensive coordinator hire and further build on what he has built there. Because we all thought in the preseason South Carolina was a team that they'll probably be better than they were a season ago after winning 7 games, but their schedule might not reflect that given who they had to go play. They beat A&M, they beat Tennessee, they beat Clemson, and they're 8-4 this year with the potentially to get to 9 games there. A very impressive year for Shane Beamer at South Carolina.
And I want to try to make this point as succinctly as I can, wrap it up. But what we're seeing in leagues like the Pac-12 and the Big 12, where you don't have divisions anymore, how you make the conference title game is way more confusing, which I think is going to be a little bit tricky for those of us in the SEC when this league eventually gets there. But admittedly, the path to making the title game is far more difficult too. And eventually all the leagues are going that way. The Big 12 and the Pac-12 are already there. I'm going to give you an example real quick, like Wisconsin. They did a very non-Wisconsin thing this week. Spending big bucks, bringing a guy like Luke Fickell. That's not the thing that Wisconsin sort of typically done in the past. I believe the reason they make that move is they're about to no longer be in the Big Ten West anymore, and their path towards postseason success, getting to conference title games, is going to be much more difficult. Therefore, you're going to decide, are we playing for real or not? I think in the SEC, it's the same type of deal here, where there have been a lot of teams that have sort of feasted on a weak SEC East in recent years. Admittedly, Georgia did that a little bit in 2017, although they probably would have won a playoff spot, or no matter what that year. But the point is you've taken advantage of kind of weak divisions. The future of the SEC, with guys like Josh Heupel and Shane Beamer and even Billy Napier trying to work there, and Hugh Freeze now at Auburn, trying to work their way into a conversation where all of a sudden it's sort of every man for himself in a 14-team or 16-team league, fight for 2 spots in the conference title game. Connor, this league is about to get very, very interesting.
It is, and I think the SEC East, especially at the top this year, is probably better than the SEC West was. But given where we have seen these 2 leagues be before, you would certainly say that yes. And I would also point out, look at the 2 teams making right now the top of the college football playoff. Georgia and Michigan, they had, I think, in totality, a much easier time getting to both their conference championship games and ultimately the playoffs, because they're able to win their division. Michigan beating up the likes of Maryland, Indiana, Rutgers that they see every year. In Georgia, you get to play Vanderbilt every year. Missouri, while they have impressed at going 6-6 this year, they're not the same juggernaut as some years you're going to go see in the future. In Oklahoma, who also ironically went 6-6. Texas, you're going to play LSU and Texas A&M. Although Texas A&M, we'll see how good they are more often. The larger point being, these schedules without divisions get tougher going forward. While it does give fans better games, we'll see how much you enjoy those better games when you're losing a few of them every once in a while. I'm not saying Georgia's going to necessarily do that with the way they operate, But the gung-ho-ness to get rid of divisions, be careful what you wish for in that situation, because it has certainly been very good to teams like Georgia and Michigan at the top of their respective divisions.
We have not taken a lot of comments tonight. I apologize, but I'm going to mention this before we go off. UGA Chris M mentioning Dabo Swinney. I'll give you a scorcher to go off the air. I don't believe Clemson ever makes the playoff again with Dabo Swinney as head coach.
That you are seeing the danger in the way in which they built that program in terms of, we're going to be selective about who we go after and who we recruit, and we're going to make sure we have a star quarterback. DJ Uiagalelei is not that, and you have seen, I think, them having a very favorable path in the ACC. The fact that the last 2 years that conference, they have not been able to navigate that and get into a college football playoff looks very, very tough for Dabo Swinney. And, now you've sort of lost that momentum of having made, I think, 7 straight college football playoffs. Now you've missed 2 in a row, especially in the way in which they've gone missing them. I think it makes it very tough for them to get back going forward. Now, they're still going to have an easy ACC path, but Florida State looks to be improving. Lord knows Miami is going to spend enough to try and be competitive there. We'll see if North Carolina ever figures out how to play defense. But this is a Clemson team that had such a wide head start over the ACC, and the fact that they have blown that, I think it's very, as you point out, discouraging for the future of that program under Dabo Swinney.
All right, let me say a couple thank yous before we get ready to get out of here. First of all, Michael Carvell, great job. And also, I want to invite all of you to be with us tomorrow night. We're going to be live tomorrow, Lowe's in Brookhaven, 3575 Durden Drive Northeast. Be there starting at 6 p.m. Connor's going to be there. The entire Dog Nation team is going to be there. We are previewing the entire run, the Go for 2 in 22 season. That happens tomorrow night, starting at the Marlowe's in Brookhaven at 6 p.m. We can't wait to see you there. Huge tailgate on Saturday there as well. And we'll be back live on video as news warrants here over the course of the next few days there too. And, of course, all of this Go for 2 in 22 coverage brought to you by a great collection of sponsors. Our friends at R.S. Andrews, the Wilson PC, Personal Injury Attorneys, Marlowe's Tavern, Georgia Farm Bureau, Kroger, the 7-6 Apparel, Royal Caribbean, Discover Dunwoody, and Berkshire Hathaway Home Services there as well. We have great events coming up. Our great sponsors make it possible, so we say thank you to all of them. And, of course, all of you for watching us here tonight there as well. Connor, have a great night. We'll see you soon. Everybody else, stay close to Dog Nation, and we'll talk to you again next time.